So we want to take a look at William Carlos Williams. And if we see T.S. Eliot as a descendant of imagism who became increasingly vested in complex elusiveness and language, William Carlos Williams represents another strand of modernism that we might think of as vernacular modernism. So let's learn a little bit about him. He was a mixed race American poet, so in many ways considered an early well-known Latino poet. You'll find him in anthologies of Latino poetry because his mom was Puerto Rican and his dad was English. He was a contemporary of Eliot's and was in fact deeply influenced by the same sort of founding father of imagism, Ezra Pound. And what's interesting about what Eliot and Williams do with imagism is they go in different directions. They both start with the idea of, dealing directly with the thing itself, that imagist principle, and the idea of clear, uncluttered language. But what happens is Eliot moves into sort of more complex structures and cultural elusiveness, and Williams goes in the exact opposite direction. He wants to focus not on illusions and cultural traditions that expand the knowledge of the powerful, clear language, but digging into vernacular life and vernacular language, the language of the people, the life of the people, in particular the life of American people and American culture. And this is where his work life is very interesting. His entire career, Williams is a working doctor. He graduates from the University of Penn undergraduate and then goes to medical school. He's got an amazing education, and he spends his life working in a lower to middle class town in New Jersey near where I grew up called Rutherford. And much of his poetry is grounded in the life he observed as a doctor among the poor and middle class New Jerseyans. So it's a very different cultural orientation than Pound and Eliot are going to pursue in their higher form of modernism. And that's why we can think of it as sort of high modernism and vernacular modernism. And so while Eliot becomes sort of this influence on academic poetry and how academics read poetry, Williams becomes an influence on more experimental poetic forms, ranging from confessional poets like Robert Lowell to the beat poets. And even later, Latino, Chicano, and African-American poets will sort of gravitate towards Whitman's idea, William Carlos Williams' idea of the vernacular, which in turn is deeply influenced by the tradition of Whitman. All right, so let's take a look at a couple quotes about William Carlos Williams before I get you into the poetry. And I think these quotes will help you kind of interpret some of his poems, which can seem, impossibly indeterminate when you first read them. And so these are out of order. This is a quote I think is really helpful. As Hoftstadter notes, Williams thought of himself as a local poet. I love that idea. A local poet who's trying to communicate democratic values by grounding himself in the language and life of the people he's serving. So in that way, he's very much part of the Whitman-esque tradition of celebrating America and American life and on the level of the street, the field, the life of the American people. And for Williams, that's even a language principle. He wants to keep his language on the level of the everyday American. Another interesting quote that I think helps you is by a critic named Donald Barlow Stauffer. And by the way, I found both of these quotes in poetryfoundation.org's long biographic essay about William Carlos Williams. So you might want to go back and check that out. What I like about this quote is, again, the connection to Whitman, but also that Williams ultimately is as depressed by what's happening in America, as depressed by the alienation and fragmentation of American culture as Eliot is, but he responds to it with, yes, the exploration of that alienation and fragmentation, but also a move towards growth. Also a move towards transcendence or breaking through the alienation and fragmentation to something new. So that there's a twist in William Carlos Williams that while his poems very much recognize death and fragmentation and alienation and find in that powerful observations about human experience, there is often also in Williams a touch of humor, a touch of hope, a touch of new growth. And think of that idea specifically when you read his fabulous poem, Spring and All, which is one of the poems I'll be asking you to look at. All right, good luck exploring Williams. I think you'll see the contrast with Eliot right away, and I think understanding Eliot and Williams as two poets who lay out pathways that poets that follow will explore is a useful technique.